Shabbat Shalom, Saints of the Most High. Welcome to the Messianic Torah Observer's Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections. I'm Rod Thomas, and I want to thank you for fellowshipping with me here on this blessed day of rest. For it is here that we gather every Shabbat to delve into Yehovah's eternal words of life, his instructions in righteousness, which is our constitution and the very foundation for our covenant relationship with the Creator of the universe. And as always, beloved, it is our hope, trust, and prayer that this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer's Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections finds you, your families, and fellowships well and blessed. We also trust that you are having a blessed and meaningful month of the Aviv. May you reach, as they say, deeper depths and higher heights in Yehoshua Messiah during this holy season. Before we delve into the discussion today, let us open in prayer. Most holy and everlasting Father, our Elohim, Yehovah, hallowed is your holy and righteous name, a name above every name, and we give you the glory and honor and praise you so justly deserve. Thank you, Father, for this month of the Aviv. Thank you for the Pesach, the Passover season, and all that it means, all of the shadow pictures that it tells us about our Master Yeshua Messiah, all that it has in its reflection of our redemption and our atonement. Thank you, Father, for Yehoshua. Yeshua, our Master, our Messiah, his atoning sacrifice and his work in the heavenly Mishkan. So today, Father, we ask your blessings over this set-apart day, this Sabbath, as well as over this discussion. Please sanctify us to receive the words that you have given me. Bless our families. Keep a watchful eye over those, especially who may not have a covenant relationship or know you in the pardon of their sins. We love you, Father, and we give you praise in Yeshua Messiah, our Master and soon-coming King. Amen and amen. Well, this is Shabbat HaGadol, the pathway towards our redemption and atonement. In observing Jewish circles, this Sabbath is referred to and celebrated as Shabbat HaGadol. Shabbat HaGadol, otherwise referred to as the Great Sabbath. Shabbat HaGadol is traditionally held on the Sabbath that precedes or that occurs before the Passover or Pesach. And so, given that Passover will occur this year, next Friday, the 15th of April, according to the calculated Jewish or Rabbinic calendar, Shabbat HaGadol appropriately takes place on the date of this posting. Given that the observational calendar has Passover or Pesach occurring on Sunday, April 17th, or our next Shabbat, April 16th, would be the more appropriate date for, well, let's just say Shabbat HaGadol for observationalists like myself. So we are a couple days off here in the calendar. We had a bit of a delay due to heavy cloud cover over the land of Israel earlier this week, and which made starting of the new month of Aviv, this Rosh Hashanah month, delayed by a day. So we are 2 days behind the Jewish calendar, the Jewish calculated calendar, as I call it. But that's neither here nor there. We are still all one big happy family. And we will keep this coming Pesach Passover season in spirit and in truth, with all the zeal and zest and love for our Father and for one another that we can muster. At least that's what it should be. And I believe most of us, all of us who are here, feel that same way. But continuing on, Pesach, Passover, is indeed viewed from a number of perspectives, a handful of perspectives, if you will, all of which lend to the abundantly rich spiritual or spiritual applications that can be applied to the season and its love story, prophetic shadow pictures, brilliantly played out in this month of the Aviv. And at the risk of diminishing the significance of any of these spiritual applications and prophetic shadows of Pesach, I want in this discussion to spotlight the redemption and atonement aspects of Shabbat, HaGadol, and Passover or Pesach. And I'll be drawing from a number of biblical references, primarily from Deuteronomy or Devarim chapter 32, verses 8 through 14, as well as Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 19 and 20. We're not going to read them right at the moment, but we will be touching upon them as we go forward in our discussion. Now, first and foremost, it should be recognized that Shabbat HaGadol is a rabbinic tradition. It's a rabbinic holiday. When I say rabbinic, I'm not saying it in a negative light. The rabbis, the sages, if you will, however you want to refer to them, I should say, they developed this holiday which they attached to the Sabbath before Passover each year on the calendar. But it is not one of the mandated feast or Moedim of Yehovah, our Elohim. Generally speaking, I do not give much attention to traditional rabbinic holidays for the simple reason that they are made up. Rabbinic contrived traditions that hold little to no true spiritual value to us. Consequently, because of a great many folks in our faith communities who tend to embrace many Jewish traditions, it would not be uncommon to find brethren anticipating and keeping this holiday. And I am by no means trying to denigrate or to talk down about these folks who want to keep it. And well, let's just do this. Biblically speaking, traditions, whether they be Jewish or secularly derived, secularly derived, made up, created, whatever, are generally fine for us to keep if we, for whatever reason, are led to do so, in particular Jewish traditions. However, with Rod, there's always a however. Yah prohibits us, his elect, from keeping traditions that are of pagan origin. I refer you to Leviticus or Vayikra, chapter 18. Let's look at verses 1 through 3. And the Robert Alter translation of Torah reads, "And Yahweh Yahuwah, spoke to Moshe, saying," verse 2, "Speak to the Yisraelites, and you shall say to them, I am Yehovah your Elohim." Verse 3, "Not like the deeds of the land of Mitzrayim of Egypt, in which you dwelt, shall you do, and not like the deeds of the land of Canaan, into which I am about to bring you, shall you do. And according to their statutes you shall not walk." Verse 4, "My laws you shall do, and my statutes you shall keep, to walk by them." And then let's look at Leviticus or Vayikra chapter 20, verses 22 and 23. And again, the Alter translation, and I modified some of the names and terminologies here. Verse 22 of the 20th chapter of Leviticus, "And you, speaking of Israel, you, Yisrael, shall keep all my statutes and all my laws and do them, lest the land to which I bring you to dwell there spew you out. Verse 23, and you shall not go by the statutes of the nation which I am about to send away before you. For all these things they have done, and I loathe them. Wow, he loathes them. Interesting. Then let's look at Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 1 through the first part of verse 3. And the Sefer Bible translation that is modified by me reads as follows. Verse 1, hear ye the word which Jehovah speak unto you, O house of Yisrael. Verse 2, thus says Jehovah, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. Verse 3, for the customs of the people are vain. Indeed, this is a no-brainer for those of us who have been in faith for any appreciable length of time. Secular, what I like to call horror days, or holidays, not trying to be funny, but secular holidays such as Easter, Halloween, Christmas certainly fall within these prohibitions. And I will tell you, in regard to such prohibitions, I take issue with the traditional so-called Jewish Seder that so many brethren in our faith will be engaging in during this coming Pesach season. I take issue with the Seder, let me repeat, the Seder. I don't take issue with the brethren who keep and engage in the Seder, who celebrate the Seder. It's the elements of the Passover or Pesach Seder that trouble me, because those elements of the traditional Seder meal seem to be of questionable origin and meaning. Let's just leave it at that. But that is just me. Every Nazarene Israelite, every Messianic, every Hebrew rooter, whatever you want to call us, must be convinced in their own mind about such things as taught by the emissary Shaul, the Apostle Paul, who writes in Romans chapter 14, verses 4 through 7. And the Sefer, which is modified, reads as, who are you that judge another man's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Yea, he shall be holden up. For Jehovah is able to make him stand. Verse 5. One man esteems one day above another. Another esteems every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Verse 6. He that regards the day regards it unto Jehovah, and he that regards not the day, to Jehovah he does not regard it. He that eats, eats to Jehovah, for he gives Jehovah thanks. And he that eats not, to Jehovah he eats not, and gives Jehovah thanks. And verse 7, for none of us lives to himself, and no man dies to himself. This is not a license to violate Torah here. In terms of what days, just like in terms of the food that we eat, in terms of what days we keep, any days that are linked or undergirded or have pagan origins don't qualify for this. Let's just be straight with this. What Shaul is talking about here are these types of days like today, which we're talking about of Shabbat HaGadol. And there are other Jewish traditions and holidays that are harmless. They're not of pagan origin. They're just traditions. And whether you keep those extra biblical traditions and holidays or not is up to you. It's up to how you're led. It's up to how you choose to follow Yah in spirit and in truth. How you're led. But when you cross that line, that demarcation, if you will, when you engage in holidays or holidays, as I say, such as the Easters and the Christmases and the Halloweens and the New Year's days and all of these pagan-rich, pagan-based holidays, they don't qualify this. It's just like eating pork and eating shellfish and all these other things. You don't have a say in that. Father stipulated the rules behind these things. But this is something that I just want to bring out here because it is important, because I know we'll have a lot of folks who may listen to this or read the transcript who'll go, well, that's not a mandated feast of Jehovah, Yahweh Yahuwah, however you declare his name. And, we should not be. I've actually come across, when I was active in social media several years ago, I used to, when I would go through the various strains or lines or whatever you call them these days of discussion on such rabbinic or such Jewish traditions and holidays, people are brutal, and they would just take people to task for keeping such days as Purim or Hanukkah, and it just was brutal that they would just. Anyway, we eat our young in this beloved faith of ours, and we've got to get over ourselves because it's not about us; it's about Him, and we have no heaven or hell to put anybody in. So, I just wanted to bring that up. Now, the other thing about engaging in keeping traditions, in particular certain Jewish traditions and practices, are those that carry with them, and this is important, beloved, those traditions, those holidays that carry with them the force of Jewish halakha that equal or surpass the primacy and authority of Torah. Now, such traditions and practices are referred to as takanot or takana. Takanot and takana. And believe me, there are many such traditions and practices that many in our faith community have fallen for. Traditions such as when the 7-week count towards Shavuot is to take place and when Shavuot occurs on the calendar are cases in point. And there are many other traditions and various days and practices around those days that they are actually, the rabbis will assert that the rabbis have declared that they were given the authority to enact such takanot or takana by none other than Moshe himself, Moses. But you and I know that that is clearly not the case. For Yah himself declared through Moshe, and this is recorded in Deuteronomy or Devarim chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. And now, Yisrael, verse 1, hear the statutes and the laws that I am about to teach you to do, so you may live. And you shall come and take hold of the land that Jehovah Elohim of your fathers is about to give to you. Verse 2, you shall not add to the word that I charge you, and you shall not subtract from it, to keep the commands of Jehovah your Elohim, which I charge you. And that was the Sefer translation that I modified just a bit. And then we have Deuteronomy, or Devarim, chapter 13, verse 1, which reads, everything which I charge you, that shall you keep to do. You shall not add to it, and you shall not subtract from it. That was the Sefer translation. Nevertheless, continuing on, there are some Jewish traditions and practices that appear to be spiritually harmless. In other words, they are not of pagan origin, nor do they carry with them any hint of being takana. And Shabbat HaGadol appears to be one of those traditional holidays. one of those traditional Jewish holidays that the Jews keep to mark the start of the Pesach or Passover season. Granted, the basis for Shabbat HaGadol seems to be that of Rabbinic folklore. For according to tradition, the 10th of the month of Aviv, or Abib, as we talked about last week, in the year of the Exodus was a weekly Sabbath. They actually determined that the year of the Exodus, the 10th of the month of Aviv that year, was a weekly Sabbath. And there is a miraculous element that the rabbis attached to that day. But in order to understand what that day is all about from these standpoints, you must first understand the sequence of events surrounding this day. And this will serve as sort of a primer, if you will, for us as we continue to guard the month of Aviv and head into the so-called spring feast, or the Moedim of Yah, the spring Moedim of Yah. We find in Exodus, or Shemot, chapter 12, the following instructions Yah gave to Moshe and Aaron for the very first Passover or Pesach. And this is going to be it's a rather lengthy one, but we want to read it. Chapter 12 of Exodus, verses 1 through 14. If you will indulge me, I will begin, and this is going to be the Alter translation, the Robert Alter translation. Verse 1. And Jehovah said to Moshe and Aaron, in the land of Egypt, saying, this month is for you head of months, or the month of the Aviv. It is the first for you of the months of the year, or the biblical Rosh Hashanah. Verse 3, speak to all the community of Yisrael, saying, on the 10th of this month, that is the month of the Aviv, let every man, and this is important, let every man take a lamb for a father's house. In other words, each head of household select a lamb, and that lamb would serve as the lamb or meal for that house, as well as for the redemption or atonement for that house. Continuing with verse 4. And should a household be too small to have a lamb, such as it's just one person or two people who compose that house, it must take together with its neighbor who is close to its house. In proportion to the persons, each man, according to what he eats, shall take his portion of the lamb. Verse 5, an unblemished lamb, a yearling male, you shall have. From the sheep or from the goats you may take it. Verse 6, and it shall be a thing to be kept by you until the 14th day, that thing being the lamb or the goat. You keep it until the 14th day of this month, and the whole congregation of the community of Yisrael shall slaughter it at twilight. Verse 17, and they shall take from the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel on the houses in which they will eat it. Verse 8, and they shall eat the meat on this night fire roasted, with flat bread on bitter herbs shall they eat it. Verse 9, do not eat from it raw, nor in any way cooked in water, but fire roasted, its head with its shanks and with its entrails. And you shall leave nothing from it by morning, and what is left of it by morning in fire you shall burn. Verse 11, and thus shall you eat it, your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is a Passover offering to Jehovah. Verse 12, and I will cross through the land of Egypt, the land of Mitzrayim, on this night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, the land of Mitzrayim, from man to beast. and from all the gods of Egypt I will extract retributions. Keep this verse 12, in your mind and heart, for we will talk about it more as we get toward the end of our discussion. I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast, because the firstborn was viewed as a god in Egypt. It was a deity in Egypt. And Father continues, and from all the gods of Egypt I will exact retribution, because I am Jehovah. Verse 13, and the blood will be a sign for you upon the houses in which you are, and I will see the blood, and I will pass over you, and no scourge shall become a destroyer amongst you when I strike in the land of Egypt. And verse 14, and this day shall be a remembrance for you, and you shall celebrate it as a festival to Jehovah. Through your generations, for everlasting statute you shall celebrate it. Again, that was Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 14. As it specifically relates to our discussion here today, I want us to pay particular attention to verses 3 and 12, for they are directly tied to the essential concepts of atonement and redemption, respectively. And this applies very much so for this concept, this holiday, this Jewish tradition of Shabbat HaGadol and the Passover season, pointing to the Passover season. But we see here in this lengthy, detailed passage of Torah that Yah instructed Moshe and Aaron to direct the people to select an unblemished, perfect yearling lamb or kid or goat on the 10th day of the month of the Aviv. That lamb or goat or kid was to be kept by each household from the 10th to the 14th day of Aviv. And then at twilight on the 14th day of Aviv, the community would slaughter the lambs or kids they kept in their homes for the better part of 5 days. The lamb or kid would be roasted and consumed in haste by the members of each family on the night after it was slaughtered, on Passover evening. However, the blood that would be collected when the animal was slaughtered would be applied to each household's doorpost and lintel. And so the first Passover went down in history as one of the most pivotal events in all of human history. The prophetic shadow pictures depicted by the selection and the keeping of the lamb and kid, the slaughtering of these animals, the blood applied to one's entrance into their home and so forth cannot be overstated, beloved. But we'll touch a little bit on this, on these salient prophetic shadows before we depart from here today. So what then does all of this have to do with Shabbat HaGadol? Well, Shabbat HaGadol memorializes that 10th day selection of the lamb or kid for each home. This tradition holds that the selected lamb or kid that would ultimately be sacrificed 5 days later would be tethered to the foot of a family member's bed. And so what's the big whoop about that, you might ask? What does that mean? Well, it turns out that lambs, or for that matter, goats or kids, were viewed and treated as deity by the Egyptians. And so for anyone, much less a Hebrew slave, to tether a lamb to their beds in their homes, well, would have been viewed as sacrilege by the Egyptians. It would go without saying that the Hebrews, on top of the everyday stresses that went along with being in abject slavery and bitter bondage, to be found by their Egyptian overlords to be keeping a lamb or a kid in such a manner would likely result in some pretty bad consequences for them. It wouldn't go well for them. But here's where the miraculous supposedly comes into this day. This is rabbinic folklore at its best. According to rabbinic tradition, it turns out that when the Egyptians saw the tethered animals in the Hebrew homes, a few things happened. They either fainted, the Egyptian who would see this would faint, or they were paralyzed and couldn't say or do anything about it, or when the Egyptians learned what the intended outcome of this rather odd situation would be in their very close future, that they simply encouraged the Hebrews to make haste and leave their land. Get done what you got to do and get out. Well, no actions were taken against the Hebrews by their Egyptian overlords for tethering one of their deities to the foot of Hebrew beds. And that is the supposed miracle of Shabbat HaGadol. Yeah. Well, and if this isn't wondrous enough for you, it turns out that the tradition asserts this day fell upon the weekly Sabbath before Passover. And although the rabbis chose not to memorialize the 10th day of their month on their calendar, on the rabbinic calculated calendar, the Jewish calendar, they do memorialize it in great part on this day that they call Shabbat HaGadol. And that is the rest of the story. Well, today, modern Jews observe Shabbat HaGadol by attending a somewhat prolonged or lengthy Sabbath service. Not only does this service include the weekly Sabbath rituals, the teachings, the readings, the prayers, messages and teachings on how members of the congregation should prepare for the coming Passover or Pesach and Week of Unleavened Bread are also added. So it's a long day, one of the longest days of the entire Jewish calendar year. Now, the Haftarah for Shabbat HaGadol, and the Haftarah is usually the reading of the prophets and even the writings that go along with the weekly Torah readings for each Shabbat. The Haftarah reading for Shabbat HaGadol is always Malachi chapter 3, verses 4 through 24. It is indeed a prophetic passage pointing to the Messianic age to come. I'm certain you all are familiar with this passage, but I would humbly encourage you during this weekend to, if you find the time and you're so led, to read these 20 verses again and appreciate the solemnity of the passage, speaking to that great day, that great and dreadful day of the Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, when he will judge the wicked and save Jacob, Israel, when the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings, when the earth will be finally purified, and Yisrael is called to Teshuvah and finally operate in Torah. There's a lot of controversy that swirls around the choice of this prophecy as the Haftarah for the day, and the name of the day being Shabbat HaGadol, or the Great Sabbath. The term "great" in this title of the day seems to be the thing in question. What makes this Sabbath better than any other? And quite frankly, the many reasons offered for this range from the absurd to moderately plausible. But I personally don't believe the descriptor of great has anything to do with this Shabbat being superior to any other Sabbath or Shabbat. but rather I think that the rabbis may have unwittingly picked up on a great prophetic shadow that is attached to the story behind this Sabbath. For indeed, the perfect lamb selected to cover us and hide us from the death that would strike every firstborn in Egypt that did not have the atoning blood applied to their homes, it foreshadowed our Master Yehoshua HaMashiach and his atoning sacrifice and his ministry, his intercessory ministry. The prophetic and spiritual implications for this obscure day and its solemn events on Yah's calendar can only be described as great. How would our ancient Hebrew cousins going through this first Passover ritual, beginning with on the 14th day of Aviv, ever know that they were foreshadowing the person and ministry of our Master Yehoshua? How would they know? If they had only known, would having that knowledge made a difference in their future walk in covenant with Yah? Maybe. Maybe not. One of the most written about concepts as it relates to Shabbat HaGadol is that of Zaman Sharutanu. Zaman Sharutanu. That the day points to the day of Yisrael's freedom and redemption from Mitzrayim, or from Egypt, by the mighty outstretched arm of Yehovah Sabaoth. The focus is on freedom from the chains of slavery to being a free people. And that feeling or spirit of Zaman Cherutanu carries forth through the millennia, even to us today, who recognize the freedom from the chains of slavery, that slavery of sin and of the gods of this world. This is the freedom that the perfect Lamb of Yah brought to us through his person and ministries. Moshe anticipated that following generations would desire to understand why we go through all of this stuff, all the rituals, all the traditions, and holidays and remembrances of Shabbat HaGadol and Pesach and unleavened bread each year. And so Moshe provided us the answer to their proposed questions. Exodus chapter 12, Shemot chapter 12, verse 27. And the complete Jewish Bible reads, "It is the sacrifice of Jehovah's Pesach, Jehovah's Passover, because Jehovah passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt when he killed the Egyptians, but spared their houses." And because of our set apart and grafted status as Yisraelites, we have every right, we have every responsibility to reverse the season, not reverse the season, little slip of the tongue, but I should say to revere the season and to identify with our ancient Hebrew cousins, if not more so, to see that the season foreshadowed the death sentence that each of us had facing us before, or being covered, bought and paid for by our Master Yehoshua Messiah. Our redemption from the clutches of the enemy taken care of by the ministry of our Master Yehoshua. Interestingly, our ancient Hebrew cousins weren't necessarily as narrow-minded about this season as we may have envisioned them to be. They also recognized the time in the future when Yisrael's Messiah would rid the world of idolatry, and the nation peoples of this world would turn to Yisrael's one true Elohim. This abolition of idolatry from the world that is mentioned in the Haftarah reading plays the Haftarah reading of Malachi chapter 3. Well, This abolition of idolatry greatly plays into the little discussed aspect of Passover or Pesach, whereby Yah redeems his chosen ones, his firstborn Yisrael, from the clutches of the gods of Egypt. The rabbis, and most of us for that matter, tend to focus on Yah rescuing the ancients from Egyptian bondage, bringing freedom to Yisrael, which is all true. It's absolutely 100% true. But the greater bondage that Yisrael endured, that the rabbis in one way or another sought to simply gloss over in their writings, was that of Yisrael being in bondage to the demigods of this world. Those demigods of Egypt, no doubt, took advantage of Yisrael's enslaved state to lay claim to them, despite Jehovah having previously taken them to be his chosen ones out of all the nation peoples of the world. Do me a favor and take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 32. Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 32. Let's look at verses 7 through 12. And here we find an amazing truth that, when not included in our expositions, not included in our studies or our discussions of Passover, of Pesach, that it diminishes the true scope and existential importance of the season and that of the person and ministries of Yahushua Messiah. Most English translations of this passage, which tend to be based on the Rabbinic or the Messianic line of scribes, read something akin to this. Verse 7. We're here in Deuteronomy chapter 32. We're going to begin at verse 7 and we're going to read, well, for now we're going to read just two verses, 7 and 8. And it reads, and this is the KJV. Remember the days, this is Moshe speaking. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. Verse 8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, and here's the point I want to get across here. Here is the focus. He set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. Let's stop. This was the King James Version rendering. In the second half of verse 8, we have a terrible error that has taken generations to clear up. The Messianites, the Messianite scribes, they transcribe the text as he being Yah, set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Yisrael. The phrase children of Yisrael in Hebrew is, of course, Bnei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael, meaning sons of Yisrael. The problem with this phrase being here is that it is terribly out of context with that which Moshe is addressing. For at the time that Yah divided the nations, their inheritance, and separated them, Yisrael was not in existence. It wasn't until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1940s that the true rendering of this passage became known to Torah keepers and lovers throughout the world. For the phrase in the Dead Sea Scrolls was not Bnei Yisrael, but rather Bnei Elohim, or sons of Elohim. Sons of Elohim in the Hebrew scriptures always refer to the angelic realm of beings. However, the sons of Elohim did not fit the rabbinic narrative and understanding of the spiritual realm, so they took it upon themselves to do what? To alter the phrase according as sons of Yisrael. sons of Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael. Now, this altering of Yah's word by the Messerites has resulted in centuries of ignorance as it relates to the true makeup of the world order. And certainly the Messerites did not stop there in their manipulation of Yah's word to fit their ecclesiastical narrative. But my point here is not to spend our time debating how much of Yah's word has been corrupted by the rabbis or the Messerites, but rather to set the record straight as to what the Pesach season truly means to Yah's elect. Now, we must recognize that the phrase Bnei Elohim, sons of God, sons of Yehovah, sons of Elohim, may refer to the uncorrupted, holy angelic beings that serve Yehovah, or that are loyal to Yehovah, or the corrupted, profane angelic beings that make up the kingdom of darkness. So, in order to discern which group of beings this passage is referring to, we simply must defer to the text in its proper context and to other biblical and extra-biblical texts. This passage is referring in great part back to Genesis chapter 10, which is famously referred to by scholars and lovers of Scripture as the Table of Nations. Genesis chapter 10. The resulting nations that descended from Noach, or Noah, through his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, totaled 70. Now, extra-biblical texts, such as those found in the book of Enoch, and even some Ugaritic or ancient Syrian clay tablets mention 70 sons of Elohim that came down to earth with the intent of mating with the daughters of humans and ruling over Yah's human creation and the whole world for that matter. And these ancient biblical texts go so far as to even mention a few of these fallen ones' names. But we won't go into that any further here in this discussion. But one of the great consequences of the fall of man is that Yah remanded his creation. He committed it to custody to the oversight of the fallen Bnei Elohim. In effect, when man fell, the title deed of the earth. Remember, Yah had given dominion of the earth to Adam and Eve and their descendants. Well, that title deed in human freedom was forfeit and given over to the fallen Bnei Elohim, the fallen sons of God. Sadly, all would be lost. All would be lost for the whole of creation, especially Yah's human creation, if it were not for Yehovah and his love for his human creation. Fortunately, Yah had a plan to redeem his human creation and ultimately redeem the whole of creation. But his plan would take little baby steps. And his redemption of humanity would begin with Yah's redeeming of Yisrael, who he described as his firstborn, and taking them unto himself, freeing them from the demigods' enslavement, which is a foreshadowing of the bigger redemption that would come to humanity through the person and ministry of Yehoshua Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. Of this, which serves as a mystery to those without eyes to see and ears to hear, Shaul wrote to the Messianic assembly at Corinth. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. And the KJV Modified reads, "But we speak the wisdom of Yah in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which Yah ordained before the world unto our glory." Verse 8. "Which none of the princes of this world knew." Not talking about human princes, beloved. Talking about the Bnei Elohim. "Which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Master of glory." Verse 9, but as it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man, the things which Yah hath prepared for them that love him. And verse 10, but Yah hath revealed them unto us by his Ruach, his Spirit. For the Spirit, the Ruach, searches all things, yea, the deep things of Yah. From the beginning, Yah had set aside a people that he would claim as his own, and that people was Yisrael. So he started with Abraham, and he called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, away from the demigods of the Chaldees. And he entered into covenant with Abraham, whereby Yah would raise up a nation of people that would be called by his name. But in time, as the nation grew, she was enslaved, both physically and spiritually in Egypt. And so in Yah's perfect timing, Torah tells us that he remembered the covenant he had with Abraham, and he, with a mighty hand and strong arm and on eagle's wings, as on eagle's wings, he rescued his beloved, freed them, redeemed them from both the spiritual and physical bondage that they endured for many, many years. So what does any of this have to do with Shabbat HaGadol and Passover or Pesach? Well, let's continue with the Deuteronomic passage we were just reading, but this time from a corrected translation. We're going to use Robert Alter's The 5 Books of Moses translation, and it reads accordingly. Remember the days of old. We're starting at verse 7, chapter 32 of Deuteronomy, or Devarim, chapter 32, beginning at verse 7. And we're going to read down to verse 12. And verse 7 starts off with, remember the days of old. Give thought to the years of times past. Ask your father, that he may tell you, your elders, that they may say to you. Verse 8, when Elion gave estates to nations, when he split up the sons of man, he set out the boundaries of peoples by the number of the sundry gods, or rather by the number of Bene Elohim. Continuing, verse 9. Yes, the Lord's portion is his people Jacob, the parcel of his estate. Verse 10. He being Yah, found him, Yaakov, in the wilderness land. Israel found him in the wilderness land, in the waste of the howling desert. He encircles him, gave mind to him, watched him like the apple of his eye. Verse 11, like an eagle who rouses his nest, over his fledglings he hovers. He spread his wings, he took him, he bore him on his pinion. And verse 12, the Lord alone did lead him, no alien God by his side. This passage, in a great sense, encapsulates Shabbat HaGadol and the whole Pesach season. For it talks about Jehovah keeping for himself a nation of people that he snatched from the Bene Elohim, the fallen ones, to make them into a people which are called by his holy, righteous name. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. But the Bene Elohim that ruled over Egypt, over Mitzrayim, had taken Yisrael and enslaved them. Yes, the Egyptians did in fact enslave Yisrael, but behind those Egyptian enslavers were the demigods of that nation. And it was these beings, both the Egyptian demigods and the human Egyptians, that Yah set his judgment and ire against. Exodus, or Shemot, chapter 12, verse 12. And the Sefer translation reads, "And I will cross through the land of Egypt on this night," that night being Passover, the very first Passover, "and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast, and from all the gods of Egypt I will exact retributions. I am the Lord." Numbers, or Bamidbar, chapter 33, verse 4. Again, the Sefer reads, "And the Egyptians were burying all the firstborn that the Lord had struck down among them, and the Lord had dealt punishment to their gods." This understanding of freedom that this season of Passover, of Pesach, symbolizes, it transcends the rabbi's simplistic idea of being freed from the bonds of Egyptian servitude. For freedom comes to humanity, whether by way of physical or the spiritual, with a cost. There are no free lunches in this world, nor in the spiritual world. There is always a cost. In a great sense, it is our English term redeem, or redemption, is what we're talking about here. Let us make no mistake about this thing, beloved. When the first Pesach in history took place, the gods of this world trembled. They trembled because they no doubt had not anticipated Yah's redemption of his chosen nation from their clutches. As far as the demigods were concerned, Yisrael had been abandoned by Yah to their eternal keeping. Consequently, Egypt, Mitzrayim, was one of their central hubs, providing an apt place in which to subdue and hold Yah's so-called covenant people. Well, when Yah decided to move on the promise to redeem his people, he did so in a way that is simply unheard of. The blood of a perfect lamb, the Pesach, would serve as the marker and pointer to Yah casting judgment against these demigods, foreshadowing not only Yeshua's redemptive sacrifice, but also their ultimate demise as rulers of this world. At the fall, Adam forfeited the title deed of this world and all therein to the demigods. But Yeshua purchased back those who would be Yah's chosen ones. And this is kind of all alluded to in Revelation chapter 5 and 6, when the seals are stripped away one by one from the scroll. And it is during that time that the full redemption of Yah's creation takes place. The redeeming of Yah's people will be completed. The redeeming of the earth and the animal creation, and all of creation for that matter, will be completed. That's not to say that everyone's going to be saved. Everyone's going to be fine and well. There's still a judgment to come. But it is during that time where our redemption is completed. Atonement and redemption, although used somewhat interchangeably by members of our faith community, and to describe what Master Yehoshua did for us, they have two very distinct meanings. The Hebrew term for redeem is Gaal. Gaal. The Hebraic meaning of redeem or Gaal is the burying, or I'm sorry, not the burying. I'm stuck on burying, folks. The buying back. The buying back or bringing back around of someone or something, to restore one to his or her original position or avenge his or her death. In the participle form of this verb, Gaal, It means avenger, as it is the role of the nearest relative to redeem one in slavery or avenge his murder. Now, when we're talking about parent and child roots, to redeem one is iconized, is highlighted, is spotlighted through the pictograph of an open mouth and a door. Now, these two elements, the open mouth and the door, carry a combined meaning of open the door. So then, when one is redeemed, they gird on their clothes for leaving. And where do we see this depicted in the Exodus story? On the night of Passover. But the ultimate goal is then to bring the one back to an original state. Yah reveals unto Moshe on the Mount of the Burning Bush, and this is found in Exodus chapter 6, Shemot chapter 6, verses 5 through 8. And beginning at 5, verse 5, Alter translation reads, "And also I myself," this is Abba Father talking, "I myself heard the groaning of the Israelites from the Egyptians enslaved, whom the Egyptians enslave. And I do remember my covenant." That is the covenant Yah made and kept with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We talked extensively about this covenant in our many previous Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections Torah readings. Continuing verse 6, "Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord. I will take you out from under the burdens of Egypt, both the spiritual and physical burdens, and I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great retributions." Verse 7, "And I will take you to me as a people, and I will be your God, and you will know that I am your God, and you will know that I am the Lord your God, who takes you out from under the burdens of Egypt." Verse 8, "And I will bring you to the land that I raised my hand and pledged to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you as an inheritance." Again, that was Exodus, or Shemot chapter 6, verses 5 through 8, the Robert Alter translation. Now, Yah's redemption came through the blood of the Lamb, as it is even today. In Exodus, or Shemot chapter 13, verses 13 through 15, Yah speaks extensively about redeeming the firstborn of all, both of children and of their flocks and herds, with a lamb, the blood of the lamb. Blood was the price to be paid for his people Yisrael, just as blood is the price that is paid for all our redemption, every last one of us. For the temporary redemption of Yisrael back then, and permanently for our redemption through Yeshua HaMashiach. We're redeemed from the clutches, the rule of the demigods of this world. Now, the Hebrew term for our English word atonement is kafar. Kafar. The Hebraic meaning for atonement, or kafar, is that of a protective covering, to go over something, or the covering of a debt or wrong. In our particular case, we're talking about a covering over of transgressions. I know there is this popular play on the word of atonement making its way in and around our faith community, especially these days, this at-one-ment that everybody seems to love. That's a popular phraseology out there, at-one-ment, play on the term atonement. And it's quite catchy, and it's really cool that people like to use that. but to me, it lacks any true fullness of meaning. The fuller meaning of the term and concept of atonement should never be diminished in our hearts and minds here as it relates to Shabbat HaGadol and Pesach or Passover. For the blood of the Pesach that was applied to the doorpost and lintels of the ancients' dwellings on the first Pesach or Passover was emblematic of the atonement that would be brought to humanity through the person and ministries of Yeshua Messiah. Just as the blood of the first Pesach covered over and hid our ancient Hebrew cousins from death that night, so does the blood of the Lamb, Yeshua our Master, our Messiah, covers over and purges out our sin debt before a holy and righteous a holy and righteous God. Romans chapter 5, verse 11. And because of Yeshua's atoning sacrifice, we are declared not guilty by the court of heaven. Our debt is paid. We receive our master's righteousness then, and we are justified before Yah. Romans chapter 3, verse 22. If anything, Shabbat HaGadol, which was enacted by the rabbis to prepare the Jew for Pesach and Passover, is really emblematic of Yah's redemption and atonement of his firstborn Yisrael, both native-born and us as who are grafted into Yisrael, the commonwealth of Yisrael. Indeed, although Shabbat HaGadol is not a feast or Moedim of Yah, the symbolism remains sound, and it can teach us a great deal about what Yah has done, what Yah is doing in the earth now, and what Yah will do for his people, Yisrael, in the future. Beloved, let us not be fooled, not be ignorant of the fact that the spirit realm, both the good and bad sides, do exist and operate in and around this world and in the heavenlies. And their influence in and over our lives cannot be denied, especially the fallen spiritual realm. Because of our elect and covenant state, we are no longer slaves to sin, nor are we slaves to the gods of this world. Yah, through the person and ministries of his son Yehoshua, redeemed us and justifies and sanctifies us so that we are no longer sons of Hasatan, but rather his, Father Yah's sons and daughters. And this is the message that should, if any, be taken from Shabbat HaGadol and the coming Passover season. That very Lamb that redeems and atones for us is memorialized by this day. He was perfect. He was sinless in every way. He came to dwell with us for a season. He passed every inspection that could possibly be rendered unto him, and he was found lacking nothing. And then we slaughtered him. His blood covered over us and saved us from sin, as well as it redeemed us from the gods of this earth, the gods of this world. So, in closing, let us stand straight. Let us look up. Let us lift up our heads, because it is during this season, during Shabbat HaGadol, during Pesach, during unleavened bread, during wave sheet, that is symbolic of our redemption drawing even closer by each passing day, each passing calendar year, each passing feast that we celebrate. I pray you have a blessed coming Passover and unleavened bread. a meaningful one, a powerful one, filled with the miraculous, filled with joy, filled with praise, filled with introspection, with love for one another, with peace that surpasses all understanding. As always, beloved, on this program, the Messianic Torah Observer Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections, may you be most blessed, fellow saints in training. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Until next time, take care.